The story of Ram, the story that we know so well and yet know so little. We celebrate Dasra to mark Ram's victory over Ravan and Diwali on the day of his return to Ayodhya. And we may remember some of the stories from the Ramayana TV serial, YouTube videos and comics. But who was Ram? Was he a person? Or God? Or both? Or was he neither and is all of Ramayana just fiction? Was Hanuman a monkey? Was Ravan really all that bad? And how did Ravan with his 10 heads enter a room? Did he make a sideways entry? And why, oh why, did Ram ask Sita to leave? Was a bridge really built to cross the sea to get to Lanka? And what about the Pushpak Viman? Answers to all these questions and much more is to be found in the Valmiki Ramayana, the story that Valmiki wrote soon after Ram's return from Lanka, and which was later retold by Kalidas, Tulsidas, Kamba, and many others over the millennia. The story that has inspired millions over the ages in our land. I urge you to read the Valmiki Ramayana with me. In fact, I implore you. But why do that, you will ask? Yes, it's not easy. This is a book that has 500 chapters and 24,000 verses. And it is in Sanskrit. Besides, some of you may say, I'm not that religious in the conventional sense. But the Valmiki Ramayana is not a religious book in the conventional sense. There are no religious do's and don'ts in the book. As Valmiki explicitly states, it is the life story of a brave, just man who became a role model in his own lifetime. It is a historical book. Valmiki himself says that this is Ramasya Charitam, Ram's biography, Ramasya Vrittam, Ram's story. And to make things crystal clear, he also says that what he is writing is Itihas. Iti ha asa. That is how it happened. It is not surprising that some remain skeptical about this, given that this story has often been described, just like the Mahabharata, as mythology. Now don't take my word when I say that the Valmiki Ramayana is a historical text. But likewise, don't take anyone else's word for the opposite as well. Make up your own mind, but please only after reading the book, or in this case, listening. Disclaimer: many of us have a deep emotional connection with Ram, Sita, and Hanuman. We may have our preferred version of the Ramayana. This reading is based on the Valmiki Ramayana published by the Gorakhpur Gita Press. So let us dust off this Adi Kavya, the oldest epic, and read it in its original form. 24,000 verses is a lot to cover. Thankfully, Valmiki gives us an executive summary at the beginning, which we will see in the next episode. Remember also Valmiki's instruction, Punyaya mitrebhyah preshayet janah. This means that you should forward this video to all your friends and groups on Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, and all social media. Just kidding. Of course, Valmiki did not say that last line, but do forward nevertheless. Iti ha asa. That is how it happened.
Thank you. Organizers, please, you can keep the season 1, episode 7 ready. I will just add some comments to what we just saw. A couple of students had asked at the beginning, what is the relevance of the Valmiki Ramayana? And also, what about these Astras and Shastras? So the relevance is this, like I think a lot of people have joined in late, and it's an important point. So I would just repeat that. We have, if a child wants to be a cricketer when he grows up, there may be an ideal, a cricketer that he looks up to as an ideal. If a boy or a girl wants to be a scientist when they grow up, they may look up to some great scientist as the ideal. But who is the ideal? For good behavior. And that is why Valmiki wrote the Ramayana. He wanted to set the highest example of good behavior, the perfect person. As long as there is bad behavior in society, and I think you will all agree that there is room for improvement in our behavior even today, the Valmiki Ramayana is relevant. The question about fact or fiction that keeps coming back, but like I said in the video, make up your own mind, but only after reading what Valmiki has said. Now, when we say that Ramayana explains ideal behavior, it is important that we understand the context in which Ram made the decisions that he did. And so, in the first book of the Ramayana, the Balakand, and there are 7 kandas or books in the Valmiki Ramayana. In the Balakand, the first book, Valmiki sets the context. He tells us about the city of Ayodhya, which was the greatest and grandest in the world at that time. He tells us about Vanaras and Rakshasas. And you will find that many of our conceptions about all these things are quite mistaken. Valmiki's description is very different from what we may imagine. Let us understand from Maharshi Valmiki what he has said about the Vanaras. Let us watch the 7th episode.
This is Valmiki Ramayana, Season 1, Episode 7, Vanaras. Who were the Vanaras? Were they monkeys? Or were they primitive tribes? Or were they a different race altogether? The answer is most emphatically none of the above. Valmiki has spelt out in no uncertain terms that the Vanaras were Vanacharinaha, people who roamed in the forests. And they were not a different race. Their genetic roots were the same as that of the city dwellers. Also, not only were they physically very strong, but they were extremely intelligent too. The Vanaras wore a tail and a headdress like a monkey, just as some even in our times, fat cats in white shirts and black suits may look like penguins, but they are not penguins, nor are they cats. They are CEOs, investment bankers, and management consultants. And not all the forest-dwelling folks wore tails. Some resembled bears. Essentially, Vanamrati iti Vanarah. The one who lives off the forest is a Vanar. Over time, the meaning became more limited, and the word Vanar started being used to denote monkeys only. Further, Valmiki says, Rukshishu cha tatha jata Vanarah kinnarishu cha. Some of the Vanaras were born to forest dwellers who dressed up like bears, and to Gandharvas. If Ruksha referred to bears and not to people who wore a bearskin, and Vanaras referred to monkeys and not to people who donned a face mask and a tail, then the above sentence by Valmiki would mean that monkeys were born to bears, which is obviously not what he meant. These forest communities were not a different race compared to the city dwellers, for Valmiki has said, distinguished rishis, siddhas, vidyadharas, uragas, charanas begot heroic sons who became forest dwellers. Note, some of the Vanaras were born to rishis, just like some of the Rakshasas, including Ravan, as well as some of the citizens of Ayodhya and other cities. The notion that forest communities were primitive people that were racially different from city-based people is absolutely false. Vanaras were physically very powerful, and they were also very intelligent. The intelligence part unfortunately got glossed over in some of the later retellings. But Valmiki is clear. The Vanaras were Nayadnyan Buddhi Sampannan Vishnutulya Parakraman, knowers of statecraft, endowed with intellect, and equal to Vishnu in prowess. Further, they were spread across forests and mountains throughout the world. Once again, the notion that the Vanaras were only in South India is completely incorrect. Yam Prithvi Saparvatavanarnava Kirna Taihi. This earth with its mountains, forests, and seas was pervaded by them. And Bhuh Samavrita Babhuva. The earth became covered by them. Extremely unfortunately, Vanaras are almost always characterized as monkeys in popular culture. Look at most contemporary comics, cartoons, or pictures on Ramayana. But look further back in history, and there is no confusion. For example, in the sculptures depicting Ramayana scenes at Ellora and Angkor Wat, Hanuman and the Vanaras are shown in a form, size, and proportion very similar to Ram and Lakshman. The only difference is that they are wearing a mask and a tail. After that background of the Vanaras in general, Valmiki now introduces the leaders among the Vanaras who will play a crucial role in the story later on. Vali, Sugriv, Tara, Nal, Neel, and Hanuman. Hanuman, born in Kishkinda in present-day Karnataka, and in popularity unmatched throughout India. The Hanuman Chalisa in Hindi, the Maruti Stotra in Marathi, and similar prayers in all languages. He is on everyone's lips in times that call for brave action or even otherwise. Now, what made this Vana reach such exalted stature? We will have to wait many seasons to find that answer. With that short diversion out of Ayodhya to understand the background of the Rakshasas and the Vanaras, we will now head back into the city in the next episode. Life in the city is as good as it gets. But there is danger lurking not too far. Terrorist cells are beginning to pop up way too close to ignore. Iti, her, asa. That is how it happened.
I hope that was enjoyable and also gave you some new information, some interesting information about who the Vanaras were. We just saw episode 1 and then episode 7. We don't have time to watch the full series in today's session, but you can watch this full series on the YouTube channel 21 Notes. 21 Notes stands for Notes from the Past for the 21st Century. And this is truly notes from the ancient past, the Adi Kavya. While the video was going on, I saw some of the questions that have been put up. And one of the questions was, have you read the Valmiki Ramayana? So just to clarify, I certainly have. And these videos are based on the original reading of the Valmiki Ramayana in Sanskrit. And there is as little of interpretation here, but just connecting you directly to the words of Maharishi Valmiki. In fact, there is nothing like reading to actually find out what's in the book. So let me read out a passage for you. Much later, and this is about the Vanaras. Much later, when the Vanaras are about to attack Lanka, Ravan sends his spies to find out how big is the army. When the spies return, this is what they say. So it's interesting what their reply is. Shatam shata sahasranam koti mahur manishinah shatam koti sahasranam shankuriti abhidhiyate. The spies are saying that 100 of 100,000, which is 1 lakh, is called 1 koti. This is the spies reporting to Ravan. Then they say 1 lakh of 1 koti is called a shanku. So 10 raised to power 12, they are saying is called a shanku. And these are the shlokas. I'm actually reading Valmiki's words. He goes on further. Shatam shanku sahasranam mahashanku iti smritaha. So 1 lakh, which is 100,000 of a shanku, is called mahashanku. Now you're wondering, what are these spies doing? They're reporting to the Rakshas Raj, Ravan, and they are giving some mathematical concepts. It goes on. They say 1 lakh Shanku is Mahashanku, then 1 lakh Mahashanku is Vrind, The shlokas go on. After Mahavrand Padma, then Mahapadma, then Kharva, Mahakharva, Samudra, Og, Mahaog. The shlokas go on. I was just interested to know how many zeros are there at the end. And I think there are 10 raised to power. So Mahaog is 10 raised to power 62. I did the count. It's about that. And then the spies say the Vanaras are that many. Now, of course, this is an exaggeration. It's a poetic exaggeration, no doubt. The Vanaras were a huge army. That's what they were reporting. But the way Valmiki has conveyed this, it is not only poetry. He has also given us the number system of that time in a very interesting way. And Valmiki gives such interesting knowledge throughout the Ramayana. There are times when he gives a list of trees grown in a particular area, botanical information, geological information, distances, lineages, whose father, mother, brother. And we were talking of names of Astras and Shastras. There are 2 entire chapters where the names of Astras and Shastras taught by Vishwamitra to Ram are given. Now, 2 sargas means 2 chapters out of a total of 500. You will find it interesting to note that Ram's first 16 years of his life are not even described in 1 sarga. It is less than 1 sarga. So, Valmiki thought it very important to report this list of Astras and Shastras. Unfortunately, today, we don't know how it works. We don't know how they work. But when you read it, it seems like a very standard, a bullet point list. In fact, there is a time in which he says, and this Astra has 2 variants, like we have variants of a car. This is the dry type and this is the wet type. Anyway, so this background of the Vanaras, likewise, the background of the Rakshasas is also very interesting. There are misconceptions that the Rakshasas are a different race or they are the people of South India or Sri Lanka. Maharishi Valmiki's words leave us in no doubt at all that all of that is incorrect. Rakshas were only defined by their behavior. He uses the word Rakshasatvam, Rakshasness. In fact, the first Rakshas that we come across in the Ramayana is a woman, Tataka in Sanskrit or Tadka in Hindi. She lives not too far from Ayodhya, so she is not from Sri Lanka or South India. And in fact, she was born in a very good family. She was a beautiful young child who, over time, as she became older, became very cruel. Valmiki says she became full of Rakshasness, Rakshasatvam, and that is how she became a Rakshas. So it's very interesting to understand all this background. But then there are also times when the poetic exaggeration, or is it something else, we wonder, because there are some things which are hard to believe. And what do you make of them? Let us watch one such incident, which is the story of Ganga, Bhagirath's story. This is season 1, episode 13.
This is Valmiki Ramayana, season 1, episode 13, Ganga. As they headed north from Siddhashram to Mithila, Vishwamitra told his fellow travelers, Ram, Lakshman and the Rishis, the history of the lands they passed through. When they came upon the banks of Ganga once again, Vishwamitra started narrating the story of Vriddhim Janma Cha Gangaya, Ganga's creation or birth and her development. Now we are traveling back many years even before Ram's time. Therefore, Valmiki may not have been the first to document these events. And Ganga's story is found in some other texts as well. But as a chronicler of the history of Ram's time and the period before that, Valmiki has included this story in the Ramayana. We saw in episode 6 that Itihas is Purvavrittam Kathayuktam, that which has happened in the past, told its story format. So as we read the story of Ganga, let us also sift through the narration to understand which is the Purvavrittam part, fact, and which is the Kathayuktam part, embellishment. In ancient times, there was a great king of Ayodhya called Sagar. In his time, there was a severe water crisis. Thousands of people died. The only possible solution was to bring water down from the icy tops of Himalayas into the dry plains below, to bring down the Ganga. Told in story format, Sagar's 60,000 sons had been cursed and burned to ashes and needed Ganga's water for their redemption. Sagar, his grandson Anshuman, and great-grandson Dilip all tried hard but were unsuccessful. The land had been reeling from the water crisis for 4 generations. Katham Gangavataranam Chinta Paro Bhavat. Now it was up to Dilip's son Bhagirath. When he became the king, Bhagirath entrusted the kingdom to his ministers and devoted himself to the task of bringing down the waters of Ganga. The challenge was not only to get the water down from great heights, but to do it safely, without causing any environmental disturbance. Gangayah patanam Prithvi na sahishyati. The earth will not be able to bear the descent of Ganga's water. Ganga starts her journey at Gangotri, which is at a height of 3,400 meters or more than 11,000 feet. She reaches the plains at Haridwar, which is at only about 300 meters or 1,000 feet. The straight line distance between Haridwar and Gangotri is 138 kilometers or 86 miles. Over such a short distance, imagine water is falling down a height of 3 kilometers or 10,000 feet. Bhagirath worked extremely hard for many years, or in other words, did tapasya, and was finally able to get the water down safely. Bhagirath brought down the water in smaller streams so that the flow could be better controlled and then connected them. In story format, it is told that the force of Ganga's flow was throttled by Shiva, into whose matted hair the river fell. A scene beautifully depicted by Raja Ravi Verma in his famous painting on Ganga. But making the connections was also a huge challenge, for Ganga was lost in the maze of Shiva's hair and could not find a way out for many years. Eventually, Bhagirath was successful, digging flow paths, making bunds and embankments, or in more poetic words, Bhagirath on his chariot led the way, and Ganga followed. Yato Bhagiratho Raja, Tato Ganga Yashaswini. Wherever King Bhagirath went, Ganga followed. But there was a major problem just as the project seemed completed. Ganga's waters disappeared, perhaps split into streams and percolated into the ground. Mahatma Janhu suggested a realignment of the flow path, and finally the river came down to the plains in the desired way. In story format, the river appeared through Janhu's ears. Bhagirath charted her flow all the way to the sea. And so was completed one of the greatest civil engineering works of all time. And it was done in an environmentally sustainable way. The new river brought health and prosperity to the people. Ganga gave life. And so she is Ganga Ma, the mother. She is Bhagirathi, born through the efforts of Bhagirath. She is also called Jahnavi in memory of Janhu's contribution. By the way, since a new river was born, she must have a birthday, which we celebrate on the Dashami of Jeshtha. Valmiki says that Ganga's waters started teeming with Matsya Kachchapasangaihi Shimshumarganaihi, shoals of fish, turtles, and dolphins. The famous Ganga River dolphin that we can see even today. And Ganga's flow was Kvachidrutataram yati Kutilam Kvachidayatam Vindatam Kvachidudbhutam Kvachidyati Shanai Shanaihi. At times rapid, at times slow, at times curving, at times wide, at times suddenly falling down, only to rise up again. Muhururdvapatham gatva papata vasudham punah. Again and again it would rise up, only to come crashing down to the ground. Sounds like a promo for whitewater rafting at Rishikesh. What a fantastic achievement by Bhagirath. To this day, a great effort is also called a Bhagirath Prayas or Gangavatarana. What an inspiring story. There is much more to it, but we need to wrap up now. As Vishwamitra said to Ram on one of the nights of their travel, Kator dharatrah ka kutstha kathah kathayato mama. I have been telling stories, and it's past midnight now. O Ram, let us all catch some sleep so that we do not face difficulties in the journey. Always the wise old men telling the ever-enthusiastic youngsters to go to bed. Iti ha asa. That is how it happened.
So a great civil engineering project, Purva Vrittam Katha Yuktam. I hope all of you enjoyed that video. Again, one interesting question that was put up on the chat was, how can you be sure that the text that we are reading is indeed the original written by Valmiki? Has it been corrupted? Has some additional things been put into the text? Now, I was also facing these same questions when I thought I will go and research the Valmiki Ramayana. And I would suggest the following to you as well. Read at least one version, before deciding which version or asking this expert or that expert, without even asking any, because if you ask experts, they will say one thing or the other. And depending on our bias, we will decide which expert to believe. Rather than that, let us read for ourselves. What I did was I read the Gorakhpur Gita Press Valmiki Ramayana. Others have said that this is an authentic version. So I said, let me at least read that. Afterwards, I have read some other versions also for my research. But again, I would say for all those who are interested, find out first what at least one version says. There is, of course, the Gorakhpur Press one. Then IIT Kanpur has also made a website on Valmiki Ramayana. You can read it shlok by shlok, including translations. So I urge you all, hopefully these videos inspire you to do some reading for yourselves, or at least see the videos. Now, with the background that we saw in the Balakand, we saw 3 episodes. The Balakand sets the context. I'm sure all of you broadly know the story that Dashrath was the ruler of Ayodhya. He had everything going for him, but he did not have an heir, somebody to succeed him. So he did the Putra Kameshti and Shatrughna. When Ram was not even 16 years old, sage Vishwamitra came to his court and asked that Ram be sent off with him to fight some deadly Rakshasas. Remember, Ram is not even 16 years old. All of you are now first year of college, means he was younger than you. And he was called to fight deadly Rakshasas. Dashrath at first did not agree, but finally he relented, and Ram and Lakshman were sent off with Vishwamitra. They protected his yajna, and then onward they went to Mithila. Very interestingly, again, Ram broke the Shiv Dhanush, but not in the Swayamvar, as is normally shown. In the Valmiki Ramayana, it is not shown. Ram was by himself. When Janak showed him the Shiv Dhanush, he tried to string it. It was broken. Ram and Sita got married, and then they all came back to Ayodhya. You know, fairy tales end when the prince and the princess get married. And then finally the last words are, and they lived happily ever after. But this is no fairy tale. And it is just getting started. And then in the next book of the Ramayana, the Ayodhya Kand, comes the critical question. Why do we consider Ram to be so great? What did he do exactly? The Ayodhya Kand is very different from the Balakand. The first 40 chapters, 40 sargas of the Ayodhya Kand cover only 24 hours. 24 hours, something happened in Ayodhya. Let's find out what happened. Season 2, episode 1, please.
Previously in the Balakand, Valmiki told us about Ayodhya, the greatest and the grandest city in the world, Dashrath's longing for an heir, and his yajna. We heard about Ram's birth, how Vishwamitra later mentored him during their travels, and finally Ram's exploits with the Shivadhanush and his marriage to Sita. Many moons passed. Age was beginning to catch up with Dashrath. He felt that the time had come to hand over the responsibility of the empire. For years I have been devoted to the welfare of the people. I am now weary and am finding it difficult to carry on this heavy burden of duty. Jirnasyasya sharirasya vishrantim abhirochaye. I feel his body has become old and needs some rest. And of course, there was no one better placed to succeed him than Ram. Why Ram? Ram had already demonstrated through his conduct as a prince that he was the most qualified candidate for this role in every respect. Valmiki says, "In archery there is no one who can match him. He is an expert in leading and commanding the troops. Yada vrajati sangramam na vijitya nivartate. Whenever he goes into battle, he never returns without defeating the enemy. He is a great warrior in every way. In fact, the greatest of them all. And though he is overwhelmingly mighty, he is never proud of his strength. On taxation and administration, ayakarmanyupayadnyas sandrashta vyayakarmavit. He knows the right means of generating revenue for the state and the right way of expending the resources. On people skills, in demeanor and speech, he is always pleasant, mridupurvam. He is ever grateful to those who have done a single good deed, but does not carry the grudge of even 100 offenses. He is highly adept at attracting and retaining the right individuals and in controlling or removing those who create problems. He is most persuasive in debates and discussions, taking people along and not demanding subservience. And with regards to what we call extracurricular activities, Vaiharikanam Shilpanam Vidnyata. He is an expert in the instruments used for entertainment and sport, and is proficient in music too. Ram is always righteous, true to his word, and free from envy. He possesses a sound character with forbearance, gentleness, and a sense of gratitude. He has attained control over his senses. In the first 2 sargas of the Ayodhya Kand, Valmiki has described in fascinating detail why Ram was the right choice to succeed Dashrath. It is also amazing that such an ancient poet analyzed his character in so many ways. he talks about Ram's physical presence, how he exuded power and grace at the same time. He also mentions some very interesting behavioral traits. For instance, Ram would go up to people and initiate a conversation and not rely on his stature and wait for them to come up to him. And from these lengthy descriptions, if we are to distill the essence of Ram, the Prince of Ayodhya, it is this. Everything that he did was driven by Praja Palana, welfare of the people, the well-being of all. For most people, self-interest comes first, then the interest of near and dear ones, and finally, if at all, the interest and well-being of society. We usually worry about rules and the right thing to do only to the extent we are forced to do so. For Ram, the priorities were inverted. His foremost commitment was to the people. His personal interest was simply absent from any of his decision-making. And he knew that society's long-term interest could only be secured through dharma, righteousness, and satya, truth. Now coming back to Dashrath's succession planning, while it was clear that Ram was the perfect candidate, it was not up to him to simply appoint Ram and thrust his decision on everyone. Dashrath had to consult all stakeholders who were going to be affected by the decision. So he convened a meeting of a parishad or council that comprised other kings as well as citizen representatives of other janpads. To the parishad, he proposed Ram's name and said, Yadidam menu rupartham maya sadhu sumantritam bhavanto menu manyantam katham va karavanyaham. If you are in favor of my proposal, kindly give me your consent. And if not, please advise what other course of action I should take. Although I favor this proposal, please do consider if some other option would bring greater good. Deliberations by the unbiased result in a better outcome. The members of the Parishad were Madhyastha, unbiased, without any conflict of interest. Interestingly, the king of Kekaya, Kaikeyi's father and Bharat's grandfather, and King Janak of Mithila, Ram's father-in-law, had not been invited. This gathering was not meant to merely rubber stamp a decision already taken, but to arrive at the right choice for succession. The Parishad members had internal deliberations and then came back and announced their decision to Dashrath. Indeed, they wholeheartedly endorsed Ram's name. But upon hearing their decision, Dashrath feigned ignorance, ajananniva, and asked them why they were so keen to see Ram ascend the throne. Was he, Dashrath, not doing a good enough job? Dashrath wanted to be sure that they had arrived at this decision for the right reasons. The representatives said that the people of all lands wished to see Ram being crowned as Yuvraj. They gave many reasons for their decision, but it is telling what they said first. Ramas Satpurusho Loke Satyas Satyaparayana. In this world, Ram is the very embodiment of Satya. This was the Ram the people had chosen. Iti her asa. That is how it happened.
So this was the Ram the people had chosen. Now, there is a question that I can take right now, since all of you are engineering students, and the question pertains to Ram Setu. Did it really happen? Was a bridge built? The description by Valmiki is very clear. It was a bandh, not a bridge, as in it was not floating on water. He's described in detail that tree trunks, sticks, stones, mud, All of that was put on a shallow part of the sea to create a walkway, a bund to cross the ocean. So that is how he has described. The popular story of bricks that were floating is a later telling, not Maharishi Valmiki's telling. So that was Ram. Now, the people had chosen him, but we know that Manthara poisoned Kaikeyi's mind, who told Dashrath that Bharat be made Yuvraj and Ram be sent off into exile. And she had two boons from Dashrath. It's like Dashrath had given her two blank checks, and she had filled them up now with the demands that Bharat be made Yuvraj, not Ram, and Ram be sent off. Now, just like a check must be honored, these were promises of the king that must be honored. When Ram was called and told about this, it is interesting that in that conversation, Dashrath did not say anything. He just said Ram at the beginning, and he could not speak anything after that. And right at the end, he said, Dhik Kashtam. Oh, what terrible torture. The rest of the conversation was between Kaikeyi and Ram. And Kaikeyi told Ram what she had demanded, and Ram said, so be it. If that is the king's promise, then that is what will happen. Without any irritation, anger, nothing, no negative reaction at all, Ram said, that is how it will be. Now, did Ram do the right thing? Interestingly, when he came to tell Kausalya about it, she said, no, Ram, you should not go. You should be here. You should rule. You should be here with me. You should take care of me. Lakshman was even more vocal. He said, what nonsense. This is wrong. You are the rightful ruler. In fact, you will find it surprising that Valmiki has said that Lakshman even told Ram to grab power. Before the word got out, to grab power, and if it came to that, to arrest Dashrath or even to kill him. He said that. Ram, of course, would have none of it. Let us watch now one more episode, because this brings the important conversation, the important topic of karma. Many times we misunderstand when we say that all of this is karma. So the discussion between Ram and Lakshman.
This is Valmiki Ramayana, Season 2, Episode 8, Karma. Ram had argued in the previous episode that there really was no choice for him but to uphold Dashrath's promise. That is, to give up the empire that was rightfully his and go into exile. All for no fault of his. But Lakshman was not convinced. Ram could see that Lakshman was seething with rage. He tried to calm him. He explained why sometimes life takes a difficult turn even when it is least expected, even if it appears grossly unfair. It is all the result of karma that the empire slipped through my hands, and I feel no sadness or anger about it because Saustabhya Atmanam Atmana, I have established control over my mind. Ram explained to Lakshman how the resultant outcomes or fruits of our karma are inevitable based on the principle of Daiva, and he urged Lakshman, Nigrahya rosham shokam cha dhairyamashritya kevalam. Restrain your anger and sorrow with fortitude. But Lakshman was furious. Cowards hide behind karma and Daiva. Those who are incapable of doing anything blame karma. O Ram, you are most capable and brave. Why won't you stand up against this injustice? You are getting all philosophical at this most inopportune time. I will fight against this great bow, this sword that flashes like lightning, and my mighty arms. They are not items of decoration.
I agree with Lakshman. If what happens to us depends on karma, then why make any effort at all?
So let's take a short detour and look at the meaning of karma more closely. According to karma, our every action has a reaction, resultant outcome or fruit that we must eventually face, immediately or after some time. And all reactions or situations that we face in our lives are the result of our own earlier actions. The actions can be physical or even thoughts. At times, the link between actions and their reactions is clearly evident to us. If we eat right, we will have a healthy body. If we study hard, we will do well in examinations. And if we are good to others, they too will be nice to us. But the problem comes when we see a situation or reaction where there is no apparent action that caused it. The principle of karma says that the effects of our actions are not only etched into our physical body and our mind, but also on a more subtle part of our self. This subtle part of the self, the Atma, or loosely our consciousness, can reside in successive physical bodies. And therefore, some effects are seen now where the causal actions were taken by the self in a previous form. The principle of karma explains why things happen in our lives the way they do, or the why me question. Ram did not put the blame on Lady Luck or anyone else. He said, I am in this situation because of my own karma. He took full responsibility. There was no feeling of victimhood. And with responsibility comes power. If what we did in the past is the cause of our situation today, then surely our actions now will affect our situation in the future. Therefore, karma is most action-oriented. In fact, it is the very opposite of fatalism. Karma turns the why me question into what can I do about it now? And we will see later that Ram is not someone who will hide behind karma as an excuse for laziness or cowardice. Later, when Sita gets abducted, Ram will not throw up his hands and blame karma. He will move heaven and earth to find her and defeat the invincible Ravan to bring her back. Those who understand karma properly will never cook up excuses for not acting, for they know that not doing something is also an action, and they must face the consequences of that too. Those who understand karma properly will also not use it to judge others. They will not say, "Oh, he is poor because of his own past karma. Why should I bother to help?" If we are able to help, that is the gift of our past karma. And how we choose to use this gift will determine our own future. So essentially, Ram and Lakshman both agreed on the vital importance of action, but they differed on what action was appropriate in this situation. Ram's conclusion was that the only correct action was to uphold the king's promise. Anything else would break dharma, the very foundation of society. But Lakshman thought that what Ram was being asked to do itself was not as per dharma. Far from it, it was a scam. Dashrath and Kaikeyi had hatched this conspiracy to deny Ram his rightful kingdom. Therefore, Lakshman's idea of action was different from Ram's. Earlier, he had talked of imprisoning or killing Dashrath. Now, he had an even better idea. Those who have conspired to send you into Vanvas, that is the king and Kaikeyi, let them go off into the forest for 14 years. Oh Ram, can't you see through this evil duo? Don't you know of people who fool others in the name of dharma? Implored Lakshman. Don't we all know such people? But we also know that here Dashrath was not trying to fool Ram, and Ram knew that too. Kaikeya vanchito raja. The king had been deceived by Kaikeyi. Ram explained again and again why he just had to uphold the king's promise. Kausalya then realized that Ram had to go. So she beseeched him to take her along. But Ram reminded her that Dashrath was old and in a fragile condition. His most beloved Kaikeyi had stabbed him in the back, and his son was going away. He needed Kausalya now more than ever. She ought not to leave him. Eventually, Kausalya came around. She blessed him. I cannot stop you. O Ram, the greatest among the Raghuvanshis, go forth, my son. Follow the path of the sages and come back soon. Her mind was convinced, but her heart still ached. She saw him off like all mothers do. Uvachapi prahrishteva sa dukkhavashavartini, wallowing in the depths of sorrow, but trying to sound very happy. She blessed him. She wished him well. She said she would wait for him to come back safe. She said all this, but the words were not coming from her heart, for the heart was too full of sorrow. And then finally, the dam broke. Ashru pratipurna lochana punah punashchapi nipidya saswaje. Tears flowing from her eyes, she embraced him tightly, again and again. Iti her asa. That is how it happened.
So that was the conversation with Lakshman and Kausalya. Time is running out, but I see some questions that I'd like to address. I've seen in the chat. One is a question about Sita's birth. Who were her parents and where was she found? How was the story of her birth? Valmiki has given very clearly that Janak, the king of Mithila, found Sita, a child, as he was clearing land for a yajna with his plow. He found the child. He tells Ram also and Vishwamitra that she is an orphan, Ayonija. He adopted her and brought her to the palace and brought her up like his own daughter. In fact, the word Sita means the line which is drawn by the plow. Hal se khichi gayi rekha. So that is the birth of Sita. Another set of questions I saw were about whether Ram is an avatar of Vishnu and whether he is God, etc. Again, I will tell you what the words of Valmiki are, and how you wish to interpret them is up to you. He has said very clearly that the story that he is writing is about a person. The word he has used is Nar, because he wants to set the highest example for us, that we too can be like that. Once again, let me take the example of a great scientist or a great sports person. Unless they are real, we will not be inspired to be like them. So Valmiki was very clear that he was writing about a real person who lived at the same time as him. He has used these words. He has also mentioned that Vishnu decided to take birth as the 4 sons of Dashrath. And some of you may know the story of the Putrakameshti and Ashwamedh Yajnas and how the payasam was given to the 3 queens and the 4 princes were born and so on. So there is a reference to Vishnu taking birth as the 4 princes, taking birth as Ram, yes. And Valmiki also says that he is writing about a real person, and that stands to reason because the objective is to set the example for us. And finally, there is also a question on the timeline of the Ramayana. Now, that is a question I would leave with you. In fact, I think I'm very happy that I have this opportunity to speak to all of you, because you are in the first year of engineering, of technical studies. I hope that some of you get interested to do further research on these ancient texts as well. There is a wealth of historical clues, whether it is geological or names of rivers, distances of places, botanical, astronomical clues, so many clues that need to be put together scientifically, and so much work that needs to be done. I hope some of you do that. But even widely, for everyone, I hope that through this session, you are inspired to find out the words of Maharishi Valmiki and get inspired by that and be the best that you can be.